Hello and welcome back. We've been talking a lot in these devotions about how we have a tendency in our hearts to shrink our lives down. So we reduce our lives to simply the things that we possess. We don't think about God. We live in a closed world where anything we can't see or touch must not be real. And so naturally, all of our attention is drawn toward those things that we can see and touch, and that's understandable. But Jesus warns against this. He warns against this because it's a small life. And in fact, he gives a great example of this in the parable of the rich fool, which is very interesting because most of us would look at that parable and say, well, that looks like a very rich life. It looks like a wonderful life. It looks like the American dream. I mean, here's a guy who he's successful, he's blessed, he has to tear his barns down and build new barns to be able to hold all the stuff he has, and then he's got a great retirement. I mean, he's got years and years of things stored up for himself so he can relax and eat and drink. And the whole point here is Jesus is saying that that's not what life is all about. It's not that those things are bad in and of themselves. They're not evil, but they can become bad if that's all your life is. And so the human heart will always shrink life down. And what Jesus has been saying throughout this whole passage is that he wants us to see that there's more to life. Life is bigger. Life is more than just these things. And so he said it early on in this chapter when he said, take care and watch out for covetousness, because life does not consist in the abundance of your possessions. He says it again here when he says, I don't want you to be anxious, which is interesting because this way of looking at the world is very closely tied to the problem of anxiety and worry. He says, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, what you will put on, etc. For life is more than food and the body is more than clothing. In other words, you shrink your life down to make it simply about meeting your needs and having your things, then you're more susceptible to anxiety. And so what Jesus wants to do is he wants to give us the freedom to be able to let go of those things as much as possible and say, God, I'm going to trust you to take care of these things. But in order to do that, he has to convince us that it's a good idea to trust God. And so that's really what he's doing in this chapter, in verses 24 and following. He's persuading us. He's giving us arguments, and he piles them on. And so what I'm going to do in this devotion is I want to just let these arguments fall on you. I just want to let them hit you one after the other and feel the cumulative weight of them so that you can understand what Jesus is seeking to do. He's trying to talk you out of worry. And so listen to what he says. First argument, we've kind of touched on this already. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap, and they neither have storehouse nor barn. So they're not animals that look ahead. They don't plan for the future. We do, and that's good, but they don't. And he says, yet God feeds them. And then he goes on to say, of how much more value are you than the birds? And so get the argument here. God takes care of unclean birds, scavengers, who do not plan, they do not store, they do not do anything to take care of. They live day by day, moment by moment from the hand of God. And yet he takes care of them. How much more valuable are you? If you're a child of God, you are way more valuable than an unclean raven. And furthermore, you're called to plan, and you're called to work, and you're called to labor. Those things aren't evil unless they become substitutes for God. So there's his first argument. You're more valuable than these unclean birds, and yet God takes care of these birds. How much more? How does it make any sense that he will not take care of you? Here's the second argument. And which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? Now, this has to do with the usefulness of worrying and anxiety. And we really do think that, somehow our worrying can actually accomplish something. And what the point Jesus is making here is that worrying doesn't do anything. We seem to assume it does something. And I think part of that is because we have been taught in our world today that we can and should be able to control everything in our lives. That is a message that we hear over and over again. People sell us things promising that this will help you control your life. And we begin to believe this illusion that life is completely controllable. Well, it's not, is it? I mean, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I mean, this coronavirus is an example. It's just, we don't know. And so what Jesus is saying is that if worrying can't really accomplish anything, then why would you assume that, ruminating and worrying about everything else can actually make something happen? It can't. It's absolutely useless. Now, there are two arguments that pound away at the idea of anxiety and worry. We're going to look at some more next time, but I'm going to close there and I want you to tune in tomorrow and see how Jesus continues to persuade us and continues to batter down this idea that somehow we're better off worrying or being anxious about our lives. Thanks for watching.